Hey, what's up, Logic fans? It's Ash again. We're going to hit section 5.6 of the text today. This is our 6th section on quantificational semantics, and here we introduce the really nice and important idea of expansions. Let's rock. Okay, so expansions are really nice because they sort of allow you to get rid of quantifiers and really model a particular sentence in a very concrete way, and this will give you the ability to produce interpretations of invalidity for arguments, especially for sentences that are extremely complex. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with sentences that are fairly easy and then build our way up in sophistication. So 5.7 covers expansions with sentences that have relations involved, and 5.8 covers expansions with sentences that have identity involved. So we're going to sort of build up to this, and you'll see how it all fits together with providing interpretations. But let's start with an example, okay? Because I think this is the best way to understand the idea, okay? Basically, when you expand a sentence, so let's take this one as our starting example, a very simple universally quantified sentence. It says everything is F, everything is red. Now, suppose only one thing existed, okay, A, little a, right? What does this sentence sort of amount to if only one thing exists? Well, if only one thing exists, then what that means is FA. So what we're saying here is that this FA is an expansion of this universally quantified sentence with one object. It's a one object expansion of this sentence, okay? But this sentence doesn't require there just to be, this sentence doesn't require there to be just one thing. There could be two things, there could be three things. So what would a two object expansion of this sentence look like? Pause now and take a stab at it. Okay, if you have two objects and everything is F, that's going to mean that A is F and B is F, right? Similarly, if you had a three object expansion of this sentence, what would this mean if there were three objects, A, B, and C? Pause now. Okay, you can pretty quickly pick up the idea, right? So ignoring parentheses for a second, but you're going to end up with a sentence exactly like this, right? And so here's the one object expansion of this sentence. Here's the two object expansion of the sentence. Here's the three object expansion of the sentence, okay? And if you wanted to add the parentheses, right, maybe we would do something like this, okay? Just to make it absolutely clear, but because of commutativity and associativity, it's not going to matter exactly where the parentheses go, okay? But the basic idea here is that we can expand this sentence, and that's going to, what's the point? Well, it makes life a little easier because we've gotten rid of the quantifier. And now we're looking at a really sort of concrete model of the sentence on one object or two objects or with three objects, and obviously you can go to four, or you can just use a sub 1, a sub 2, all the way up to a sub n if you want more individual constants, okay? And supposing that, for example, this sentence occurred as a premise in an argument, and you were trying to prove that that argument was invalid, okay? Then you might have a situation like this where this is supposed to be your interpretation of invalidity, okay? And you're looking at this sentence, and maybe you're trying to do an invalidity demonstration with only one object. Well, this sentence with one object comes out to this, and so if it's a premise, you know you need to make it true, right? If it's the conclusion, you know you need to make it false, right? And so by expanding a sentence, okay, you can get a really good idea of what you need to make true and what you need to make false with respect to your interpretation of invalidity. So let's suppose you were trying to do it in two objects. Well, then you would be looking at this expansion and you would say, oh, okay, I need to make both of these turn out to be true if this is a premise in an argument that I'm trying to demonstrate to be invalid. If this is the conclusion of an argument that I'm trying to demonstrate to be invalid, then I know I need to make at least one of these here false, right? So I'll make that one false, and since that's false, I know the entire conjunction is false, which means I know that this here, my conclusion, is false, okay? So by expanding, you get a really concrete model of a sentence that will allow you to know how to fill in an interpretation to demonstrate, for example, invalidity. And we'll do some examples of that at the end, but I want to stay focused on just how to do the actual expansions themselves for now. Okay, so let's go ahead and give you a second to take over. Pause now and see if you can expand this sentence with one object, with two objects, and with three objects. Okay, what would the expansion of this sentence look like? Pause now. Okay, well, this says everything is such that it's not F. So reach in there and pull anything you like out of Santa's bag. It's guaranteed to satisfy the following description. It's not F. So if I've got one object in there, that means that A is not F. If I've got two objects in there, that means that A is not F and B is not F, right? Everything in there satisfies the description not F, okay? So if you had three objects, right, it would be, the negation of everything that you had up here, right? So it would be like this. And it would look something like that, okay? So that's exactly what that would look like. Okay, now let's go ahead and try yet another. Okay, let's try case number 3 here. How would you expand this sentence? Okay, I'll give you a hint in a second, but how would you expand this sentence on a 1, a 2, and a 3 object expansion? Okay, pause now. Okay, let me give you a hint, all right? 3 here is the negation of 1. So it's going to be the negation of each of these. So for example, you're going to have this thing, but it's the negation of that. Okay? So can you finish it from there? What would it be? Pause now. Okay, well since it's just the negation, right, of everything from sentence 1, right, then it's just going to look exactly like this. All right, I hope this is making some sense the way I'm presenting it. So it would just end up like that. Okay, and that would be a perfectly adequate expansion of sentence 3 on 1 object, 2 objects, and 3 objects. Now, there's another thing you could do here, which would be alternatively, okay? If you remember your rule De Morgan's, you could De Morgan this through, right? And you would end up with this. And this would be a perfectly adequate translation of the, or expansion, I should say, of the sentence as well, okay? So you could look at it like this. If you were to De Morgan through the whole thing, these would also be equivalent sort of translations, okay? But I'm going to present it in the negation of one form just to re-emphasize that point. So like this, for example, okay? This is perfectly adequate, and this emphasizes that it's just the negation of what you're finding from sentence 1, okay? Use that clue to help you expand sentence 4. Okay, on 1 object, 2 object, and 3 object expansion of sentence 4. Pause now. Okay, well hopefully you were able to figure out that sentence 4 is really just the negation of sentence 2. So it's going to be sentence 2, but negated, right? So all of these expansions are just going to be the negation of that, right? So this is going to be the negation of the negation, which, intuitively we can just write this way, all right? And if you think about it, it says it's not the case that everything is not F, right? So something is F, but if you have one thing, A, then that's what it's going to amount to. That very thing has the property F, right? Alternatively, it's going to be the negation here, right? It's just going to look like that. So, another way you could think about it is if you were to De Morgan this through and do the double negation cleaning up, it would just look like this. Okay? Very simply, right? That's all it would be. And let's check if that makes intuitive sense, okay? So this says it's not the case that everything lacks the property F. It's not the case that everything lacks it. So if I've got two objects, that's to say either A has it or B has it. It's not the case that everything lacks it. So one of these two has to have it, possibly both, right? Okay. And similarly here, if what you're going to do is just sort of think of 4 as the negation of 2, then you would have a situation like this, where all you're doing is negating 2, okay? But if you were to sort of De Morgan this through and then cleaning up the double negations, you would be left with something like this. And again, this is going to make perfectly fine intuitive sense, right? It's not the case that everything lacks the property F, so either A has the property or B has the property or C has the property, if in fact there are 3 objects, okay? All right, so let's try the same kinds of expansions just to get you some practice with it, okay, with the existential quantifier as opposed to the universal quantifier. So let's go ahead and here let's do let's do the first existentially quantified one here, the second one here, the third one here, and the fourth one here. So these are basically the same problems, except you've got the existential as opposed to the universal quantifier. What would the expansions look like for the existential quantifier on a 1 object, a 2 object, and a 3 object expansion? Pause now and run through them, then we'll come back and do them together. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to do this, but if there's one thing that's F, right, if at least one thing is F, and you've only got one object, then it's just going to turn out to be FA. So notice it has the same expansion as this one so far, okay? It also has the same expansion as this one so far. But if we keep going and we say at least one thing is F and there's 2 things, well, we're going to get FA or FB. Right, at least one thing, so either A is or B is, right? So notice when we expanded sentence 1 with the universal quantifier, we used and. And in general, you want to use and for expanding universal because it's saying everything is this way. So A is this way, and B is this way, and C is this way. The existential is saying at least one thing. So either A is that way, or B is that way, or C is that way. There's the special case when you have just one thing A, okay? But notice here we did end up with the ors, but remember we De Morganed, right? Originally there were all ands, okay? So if there at least one thing is F, and you've got 3 things, right? It's going to be FA or FB or FC. All right, now I want you to pause here, and I want you to notice, does this have anything in common with anything we've seen here? Okay, with anything we saw from the universal quantified cases. All right, you probably noticed that these two are the same. They have the same expansions, right? After the De Morgan cleanup, it really makes it perspicuous that these have the same expansions. Now, the fact that these have the same expansions for 1 object, 2 object, 3 object, 4 object, 5 object should tip you off to something about this sentence and the other one, right? This one. This sentence was this one. Right? Since they have the same expansions, what's that suggest to you about these 2 sentences? Well, it should suggest to you that they are logically equivalent, and indeed they are. But that's not something we're going to be able to prove, as we discussed in the last video. We can prove that 2 sentences are not logically equivalent, but we can prove, so we can prove that they're not logically equivalent, but we cannot prove that they are, although this is powerful evidence that we're gathering that they are logically equivalent, okay? So stay tuned to chapter 6 for actually being able to prove something like, the idea that they are logically equivalent. We'll have a similar sort of syntactic kind of way of capturing that idea. Okay, we're running out of time, so let's continue these examples on the next video. So look for, and I'll see you on 5.6b.